Sorry for the slight delay. This is giving everybody a chance to finish their lunch before we start. There's a few more sandwiches over there still. Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, very nice. For those of you who are new here or don't recognize me with my new haircut, I am Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, and really glad to have all of you here today for what should be a great conversation about teacher evaluation. Let me do a couple logistics as we get started, and then I'll introduce our guests. We've got a few presentations, and then we'll get right into the conversation. First of all, of course, we've got to get the Twitter hashtag out there right away. It is evalterrain, hashtag evalterrain. If you see me up here, I'm not doing my email. I am checking the Twitter so that I can get some of those comments in there. And yes, because I like to show off my multitasking skills. Okay. What was the recent study recently that women multitask better than men? And so I'm trying to, not give in to that stereotype threat there, and I'm going to demonstrate that it's possible for us guys to do it too. Okay. This is a topic that obviously has divided a lot of people, not just in education policy along many of the typical lines that we know now are drawn in too many places, but also within education reform itself. Many of us here at Fordham have been pretty skeptical of policies that try to mandate a particular approach to teacher evaluation from the state level. We have not been a big fan of the federal government getting deeply involved in this, as they have now through Race to the Top and through the waivers. And yet at the same time, I think we could all agree at some high level of abstraction that it's a good idea that we have more rigorous teacher evaluations in place than we have before. I think most of us would agree that in the typical school district in America, we haven't taken teacher evaluation very seriously. That means we haven't been giving teachers the kind of solid feedback that would help them to improve. We haven't done a good job communicating a vision of instructional practice that would help them improve, nor have we had systems in place to remove those handful of ineffective teachers out there that perhaps should be finding another line of work. So we probably would agree at that high level that this was an area ripe for change. But whether the changes that are happening now in the classroom and across the country are the right changes, that's what we're going to talk about today. And we'll also certainly talk a lot about who should be doing what. What is the right state role? What's the right school district role? Is this an area where there should be a lot of local flexibility or not? Is there perhaps more local flexibility than many of the local districts think there is? We're going to unpack all of that today. I do want to say, by the way, to any suburban affluent moms out there in the crowd, I have personally no beef with you. Okay, so Arnie Duncan might view you very skeptically, but that's not going to come from the podium here. I'm trying, people. Come on. I'm trying with these jokes. Give me something. All right. So we have a great panel. You can read about them in depth in your packets or online. But very briefly, we've got Sandy Jacobs, the Vice President and Managing Director for State Policy at the National Council on Teacher Quality. Yes, thank you, Sandy, for being here, one of our co-sponsors. We have Chet Linton, the CEO and President of the School Improvement Network, another one of our co-sponsors. Thanks for being here. Alice Johnson-Kane, Vice President for Policy at Teach Plus. And Rob Wheel, Director of Field Programs, Educational Issues Department at the AFT. Rob, thank you for being here. So here's how it's going to work. Sandy is going to come up and give a 10-minute presentation on their brand new report on teacher evaluation policy. If she goes a second over, I will turn into Checker Finn and throw her off the stage. Then Chet will come up and he has 10 minutes to talk about their new report on teacher evaluation policy. Same rules. Then we'll get into a conversation about what all of this means. So please welcome Sandy Jacobs.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks, Mike. I'm really feeling Mike's pressure, so I'm just going to dive right in. Oh, is that better? No? How are we doing now? No? Oh, technical difficulties. It seems to be on. Can you hear me okay now? Yeah. Okay. So at the National Council on Teacher Quality, we've been tracking state policies for a long time. And as we look at teacher evaluation policy, this is an area where you could almost get whiplash just in how much has happened so quickly. We did our last State of the State scan in 2011, just 2 years ago, and we were pretty amazed at where state policy, anyway, had moved then. And 2 years later, it's almost a complete policy transformation. Just to show you the trends over the last few years. Now, at this point in 2013, it is easier to count the number of states that don't specifically require student achievement to be part of teacher evaluation than those that do. It was the absolute reverse just a couple of years ago. A really significant number of states now require not just that student achievement be included, but that it be included as the most significant factor in teacher evaluations. And 18 states are now connecting evaluation to tenure decisions, which just a few years ago, tenure seemed like the most sacred of sacred cows. And as we've gone back and looked at what states said to us just a couple of years ago about tenure, they said, it can't be changed. It might be on our agenda, but it just can't be changed. And just a couple of years later, 18 states have made that change. So looking a little more closely about state requirements about student achievement, as I said, we find just 10 that aren't specific about including student achievement. The feds might not agree with us on that number because, as you know, there are fewer than 10 states that don't have ESEA waivers. But we're a little pickier. We need to see something in policy beyond just the commitments in a waiver. So unless we could see either specific state policy or see something in action, a system being built, we did not count that state. Among the 36 states that now require student achievement to be a very significant factor in student achievement, we also, in that group of 16, it's worth breaking down that some, significant is in quotes because that's the words that the Department of Ed have used in the waiver requirements, that it has to be a significant criterion. And about half those states explain what they mean by significant, and the other half just echo back the word significant, usually in the same quotes. So we have to watch those states and see what emerges there, whether or not it really appears that student achievement will be a significant criterion. As far as the systems themselves, how they are rolling out, a pretty small number of states, about a dozen, have a single statewide system. Although even within those states, there are some flexibilities on various parts of the system. There's really just a couple of states where you're really locked in, A to Z on the entire state system. There's another group of states that have a state model that's the presumptive model. It's presumed that you will use that model unless you get state approval to do something different or comparable. More than half the states have an optional model available, or just make guidelines available. And then there's just a couple of states that really haven't said what they're going to do yet. This is an area that's rolling out quickly. As far as teacher observations are concerned, most states are very specific about teacher observation being part of the evaluation. That's not to say that we think that in the states that aren't specific about that, that necessarily means that observations aren't occurring. Although just a few years ago, I think we would say in places that was likely the case in a number of places, that it was just a checklist or an interview and it wasn't a real observation. So those are more vestiges of old requirements. About half the states are specific that there need to be multiple observations. 15 states require unannounced observations to be part of the system. I think, as we have more and more data showing that maybe it doesn't really matter whether the evaluations are announced or unannounced, but we know logistically it maybe makes it easier for districts to coordinate their systems if unannounced observations are allowed. At the same time, we know that that's one that teachers are not so comfortable with in some systems. We only see 22 states that are really specific, that teachers are meant to get feedback from their evaluations. Again, that doesn't mean that in all the other states teachers aren't getting feedback, but we think it's a really important marker that states need to put down that says the intention should be that you're supposed to get feedback. And I can think of a state that has a state model where the feedback form the feedback box is about that big. And so the message that they've sent, right, is not that the idea here is to give you lots of information about your practice, but that you're going to get a summary comment or two. So this is something we think it's really important for states to pay attention to. A few other things that are trends that are emerging. We were really surprised to see how quickly states have moved to incorporate surveys into their evaluation systems. 17 states now specifically require or specifically allow districts to use surveys. This comes off the Methods of Effective Teaching study finding about what good indicators student surveys could be. It's also a little surprising to see that many of those states, and you can find more details about this in our Connect the Dots paper, have gone beyond student surveys to incorporating parent surveys and peer surveys as well. A small but I think growing number of states have also started to develop a certification requirement for evaluators, and that's not certification in sort of the traditional, go through some program and get licensed, but it is a certification in terms of that a certain amount of training has been completed and completed successfully. Some states have validity testing, reliability testing that has to occur before you can get that certification. So our purpose in this recent paper was to look at how well states are connecting the dots. We knew states had moved forward on evaluation, but to what extent do they have the framework in place to really use the information coming from the evaluation systems for other aspects of teacher policy? And regardless of where states are in implementation, our feeling was that it's not too soon to have the framework in place. That doesn't mean you have to be using the data before you feel ready to use the data, but that if you don't have the framework in place, you're not sending the message out to districts and teachers and the public of what the plans are here and how the dots all connect. As I said earlier, a good number of states had moved on tenure. That's actually 19 because we also counted DCPS in this table. About half the states are clear that teachers with poor ratings should go on improvement plans. Only a small number of states have plans to report the findings from teacher evaluations, and the reporting that we're advocating is for aggregate school level data, not individual teacher data, but aggregate school level data, which I think tells you something very important about distribution and equity, but only a few states have gone there. Connecting evaluation systems to compensation, again, a few states moving on that front. About half the states now are specific about connecting to dismissal policy, a smaller number connecting to layoff policy. Licensure is an area where states are just beginning to put their toes in the water. That licensure reciprocity, that state is Delaware. As part of the act that was mostly about teacher preparation that Delaware passed legislation earlier this year, they also had a note that seems so smart in it. It said, if a teacher from another state wants a license in Delaware, and they have evidence that they're an effective teacher from a system that we consider comparable to Delaware's system, that's all they need to do, and we're going to give them a license. It seems like a great way to cut through some of the bureaucracy around interstate portability that has a real problem for teachers, and they were thoughtful about it. They know that states are in different places about evaluation systems, so they were clear in saying it has to be a system that we think is comparable to Delaware's. Only a small number of states have thought about how this data is going to connect back to teacher preparation, specifically how student teachers are selected, making sure that student teachers are partnered with effective teachers, and also connecting evaluation ratings or student data back to teacher preparation programs. So I don't know how I am on my time, but I'm going to stop there. Much more detail can be found in our paper, Connect the Dots, as well as some lessons learned and recommendations that are our advice to states as they move forward. Thank you.
I'm going to put up a mic timer here so it can be official. Great job, Sandy. I think you're going to find that some of the things that we found at School Improvement Network are similar and actually dovetail very nicely with some of the other findings that were just presented. I'm going to I can pull up our presentation here. All right, very good. So we at the School Improvement Network, we're an organization that's been around since 1991. We're very focused on trying to do those things or create the innovations that will support teachers and administrators, virtually all educators, and helping them truly become effective at what they do so that every single student, if at all possible, can have a positive impact in their lives and really make a difference. One of the things we found early on as it relates to teacher evaluation, in fact, largely this was driven by a few comments that I heard in Washington a little over a year ago, which was, we're in the wild, wild west of evaluation. And my first thought was we've been observing and evaluating teachers for decades, but the reality is with all of the changes, with the waivers and the expectations now, and so much of all that is going on is largely compliance driven, we have seen some massive changes. One of the biggest pieces was that as we started to go into school systems, our liaisons would find that as they spoke with states and then spoke with district or school level administrators, there were vast differences in the expectations of what they should or should not do or could not do. And also some big, big gaps between what policy actually existed and the perceived policy that actually did exist or did not exist. We appreciate, also I should mention, GH Global Strategies, Christina and her group for the help they gave us in gathering this data and putting the paper together that's outside for all of you to grab. So we looked at all states, we talked to every single Department of Education to find out where are they at, what really matters, how are they implementing teacher evaluation, and what is their policy surrounding it. And then we also were very curious about how much freedom and flexibility really did exist, because we would have school district administrators say, there are certain things we cannot do, and there are certain frameworks that we must embrace, and yet as we would talk to the states, we found that it was completely different. And even in those that actually had mandated and adopted frameworks versus those that did not at all, there were discrepancies. And our concern is if schools are really able to innovate and evaluation is important, what kind of challenges does that create, especially as it relates specifically to professional learning needs of teachers? So the results, we found that 37 states have flexibility to develop their own rubrics. We have 11 states that have mandated or adopted a rubric and said this is what you need to use. And then 2 states, California and Iowa, that are still in flux, early implementation, trying to figure out what does make the most sense for them. The states with mandated instruments, as I mentioned, are DC, specifically we'll include them here, Georgia, Hawaii, Idaho, Mississippi, Nebraska, New Mexico, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Washington, and West Virginia. Of course, as we're out working with these states and with their districts, again, it's interesting to see the perceptions that they have. So there are many unintended consequences. One of those, is, as I've mentioned, is there's this large communication gap between the state agencies, the SEAs, and then the LEAs. Where they're at, what are the things that they have to do, and there's a large degree of misunderstanding about how much autonomy the school district actually has as they design teacher practice. The other key point is that the emphasis on compliance seems to be a big driver with waivers. So how do we comply? What are the things that we need to do? And often along with the compliance requirements of waivers, there are very, very tight timelines, which has had great impact on what's actually been adopted and or perceived to be implemented and what instruments would be used. So Janice Pota shared this quote that I think is valuable and we all need to hear. Both states and districts have to ensure that any system that develop is valid and reliable, along with being legally defensible in arbitration, and most districts are challenged by the time and resources it takes to do this. So in other words, when school systems start to go down this road, when the LEAs are moving in this direction and they hear all of the noise that surrounds us, they're scared. There's a tremendous amount of fear, and usually, our perception is conclusions are jumped to and programs adopted or tools adopted that may or may not actually have the desired impact and ultimately outcomes. As we talk to our liaisons and the districts that they work with, we have over 4,500 LEAs that we're working with and we've talked to across the country on a regular basis. In the 37 states where teacher evaluation legislation gives districts flexibility, designing or selecting a teacher practice evaluation framework, that flexibility is often not clearly communicated to the district. So there is flexibility, but it's not communicated. So we've been in several systems that have said, many, in fact, hundreds that have said, we've got a mandated program, we have to do the following, and yet as we talk to the states, they say, no, that's not the case at all. Districts have tremendous choice. Of course, 73% are not aware. In fact, we find that our district liaisons, when we talk to them, their perception was they are the ones that are informing districts about what state law actually is and what the options are. And of course, generally it's been that way most of my career over the last 23 years in education, is that the feet on the street, those that are working hand in hand, seem to know more about it than the information that's pushed out from the state. And we know there's a myriad of reasons why. And then 74% of our liaisons say that, as I mentioned, they're the primary source. The others are not aware. So reasons for the confusion are several. But first, there's vague policy. It's either vague or it's dense or overwhelming. So as systems are able to look at this, they jump to conclusions or reach their own conclusions. Maybe jumping's a little strong. But then on the other hand, there's just too much information. And with all of the things that are going on in education anyway, it's difficult to find the time to really understand it. And so there's failure on the part of the LEAs to thoroughly review because of these or to decide what makes the most sense. And then the third point, or third reason, is that there's really an onerous process for alternative rubrics, the things that an LEA may feel is actually the best thing for their district, has short turnaround times and timelines to comply with some of the requirements, whether it's state, bubbling up to the federal requirements, that oftentimes systems are adapted or adopted, I should say, that really are not key in getting the end result that's desired. We surveyed over 2,000 teachers in 46 states and about a teacher evaluation. We always want to find out, what do the teachers have to say? I mean, after all, they are the feet on the street, and of course Rob's here as a great voice for teachers as well, but rarely do we find that teachers are given the voice they need in the systems to help systems determine what they should be doing. So nearly half of evaluations use state-developed frameworks. You know, this is again what the teachers are saying, their perceptions. 70% of the educators surveyed do not believe the evaluation process in their school works effectively. And 67% believe that evaluations do not provide a fair and honest reflection of their work. So there are these rubrics that have been adopted that may or may not truly meet the needs of the system. So this was on the other data, the other research that we've done. And then when we ask teachers, well, what does this look like? How does it impact you? They feel like it really doesn't bring or show their practice the way they would like it to be reflected. And of course, 46% of those surveyed say that their evaluations are not accompanied by professional development. So, hey, Mrs. Smith, you need to, here are the things we've observed in your classroom, fix them. Instead of, we've observed these things, here's some supports and support structures that are in place to help you evolve and develop your skills and grow as a professional to be able to address what may have been observed or showed up on your evaluation. So there aren't a lot of, and we hear more loosely, we didn't include this in our survey at the time, but we're seeing that more and more teachers are saying, we need additional supports, we're getting these evaluations now, and we want to know what to do. You know, they really do care about what's going on in their classroom. So our conclusion, or in conclusion, state and LEAs still have work to do before evaluations truly reflect teacher practice. If I were to summarize in the simplest of terms, it feels like we hit the gas. We know that we need to make adjustments and changes to really meet the needs of our teachers and fit the needs of the LEA. But what happens is time's usually short. There's too many other distractions, and so quick decisions are made. And so we're really not getting that or helping teachers move to a point of reflective practice. Technicalities are hindering the LEAs in their desires to really do this. And wrapping up, LEAs default to the state-developed frameworks because of that. So we feel that, or we've observed that the dissatisfaction in the evaluation process, we know ultimately, if we don't correct it, it will create additional challenges and frustration, so we won't see the desired impact, whether it's from the federal level through the states and down ultimately to the districts. Oh, and there's my time.
Just right on time.
Thank you.
Nicely done. Okay, well done, both of you, right on time. All right, so let's start off. For those of us that don't do this every day and think about this issue every single day, let's make sure we're all kind of in agreement about what we're talking about. We're throwing some words around like frameworks, right, and these evaluation systems. I think both of you agree that there are some states that have been more prescriptive and other states that have been much more flexible. But if we walk into a typical school district today then, and we're trying to look at these evaluation systems, what is it that we're talking about? You're talking about what? Like how much does value-added student achievement count for? How much does evaluations of students count for? And then what? There are these frameworks people like Charlotte Danielson have put out that guide the observations and things. Can you kind of why don't both of you kind of give a little bit more texture onto what this is about at the local level?
Yeah, so in some places, I mean, it's a soup to nuts system. It's all spelled out. This is exactly the observation rubric that's going to be used, whether it's Charlotte Danielson or some other rubric. This is exactly how the student growth piece is going to be used, whether, again, that's calculated at the state level, usually for the tested grades and subjects, and then the guidelines for the other subjects, and then if whatever other measures are going to be. That in a statewide system, that's sort of all spelled out. But then there are states that have just said, these are the criteria you need to include, maybe have some additional requirements around those criteria, but it isn't all spelled out to the nth degree. Just one other note on that, when we say, when we go into a classroom right now, what will we see? In most places, this has not begun to be implemented yet, and I think that's really important to know. We have lots of policy change where the implementation isn't nearly as quick.
So Chet, when you say your people are in these school districts and they think they have to use a particular framework or approach, I mean, is that like the Charlotte Danielson observational framework? Is that what they're talking about? Or are they talking about this broader sort of soup to nuts aspect? I'm just trying to get a sense of what this is.
Yes, that's exactly right. So the reality is that we see several frameworks that have been adopted or portions. And usually when you drill into this, it's a portion of a framework. It may not, the general perception is, we adopted Danielson's, or we adopted Harvey Silver or Marzano's, or the teacher effectiveness framework that we've developed, or whatever it may be. But then there are components that have been really personalized to the needs of that district.
Okay.
And creating misperceptions.
And are all of those just about how you do observations, or do they go beyond observations?
They go beyond, and they're all varied. So ultimately, there's a framework that will be utilized there may or may not be rubrics. Generally, we're seeing districts create their own rubrics that then are, it's an adaptation of whatever work's already been out there. So
okay.
that also creates some additional confusion with the rubric. Now let's weight this with all of the other components that you mentioned in those pieces and parts, and we get these very highly complex formulas to really be able to get to have a weighted formula that makes sense, or an outcome that makes sense. So it's creating, I think, systems, LEAs are sometimes their own worst enemy.
Yeah. That they're getting very complicated and complex.
That a teacher doesn't.
All right. So Rob, at the local level, Rob. So we'll get to the policy pieces later. But do you have a strong sense of what best practice is at this point, or the systems that you like best? Which how much these different pieces should count for, or which observational frameworks seem to be strongest?
Well, I think I think first of all, when you talk about weighting, that's far away.
Yep.
Okay, when you talk about weighting. It's silly to talk about weighting when you don't even know the measures, but people do that because it's easy to do, and they like to put numbers down in the legislation because it makes them feel good. But they don't even know how good the test is, they don't know how good the measurement is or the algorithm, but they put it down anyway because they know. But the biggest point here is when you talk about teachers on the ground, they were hoping that this effort to improve instruction would actually work, that things were going to be brought forward, information, relevant things, timely information, so they can improve their practice. This reform hasn't moved to that. It's actually stopped at the measurement. Hundreds of millions of dollars was spent to do measurement, but it stopped when we started talking about, now we got to do the hard work of actually improving instruction, providing feedback, providing information, providing relevant and timely feedback to teachers. That's what they're seeing. The algorithms, the makeup of the system, teachers, sure, they're involved in that development when they are allowed to be involved in that development, but what they're really hoping for is information to help them help their kids. Mm-hmm. And that's not what's happening. They're not getting that information. They're getting put up on a ranking table as, here's where you rank. That's not what they're looking for. That's not what they were hoping for. That's not what this should be about. This should be about helping teachers help their kids in the classroom.
All right, now Rob, all fair, but let me get back to this question. I mean, are there certain systems out there that you like better than others, that you think are more valid and reliable, that again have a vision of curricular and instruction that you think is closer to spot on?
Sure, there's no system out there that's got it right, for lack of a better way to say it, but there are some systems that do observation better than others. There's other systems that do multiple measures better than others.
You name names?
Well, I think that the observational system in Cincinnati was a strong one. It's been researched. It's shown that teachers that do well in that observation, their kids do better. But unfortunately, the state wants them to change that because it doesn't. The current Cincinnati teacher evaluation system doesn't comply with state law, so it has to. Even though it might be good, it has to change because we have to comply with the state law. The same thing would be true like in Montgomery County with a system that has a little bit of peer assistance and review to it. Again, being pushed, saying, hey, we have this law out here, we have this race to the top thing that we have to change, and so you have to change something that works. And so that's when people ask, is this about really helping improvement or is it about complying with laws? So there are systems out there that do it well. If you talked about each individual part, there are systems that do a good job. Cleveland does a good job with observations, and there's other places that do other parts. But it's a matter of bringing it all together, and right now we're bringing it all together to the wrong end in what our members would say.
Right. They feel like it's just an exercise to try to fire bad teachers, right?
Well, it's
Instead
to
of
rate
improve.
them, and
Right.
they understand to make human resources decisions. All the things that you see out there, all the things that was, most of the things listed on Sandy's was what the human resources director in the school district or superintendent would do with the information. Very little of it is what would the teacher do with the information. And that's that's when you get into a position of what is the definition of doing evaluation well? Doing evaluation well should be the definition. It helps teachers improve their instruction in the classroom. Start there with that definition. It might be a better place to go.
Okay, let's bring Alice into this. You work with a lot of great teachers in the Teach Plus network, many of whom really like these new systems. But again, at the local level, are there certain systems that you've seen have been developed particularly thoughtfully that we should hold up as models?
Yes.
And would you like to tell us about them?
In fact, I would.
Yes.
And so I think the soup to nuts definition really should be that the information from the evaluation systems is connected to classroom practice and is changing it in positive ways for students. And I think until that becomes the norm, we're just looking at a very narrow sliver of a piece of the puzzle. So I completely agree with Rob that at the end of the day, it should be about improving practice. Where I disagree is saying that it's not happening anywhere, because we are seeing it happen some places. The one that comes to mind for me is Memphis with the TEM system. And we actually surveyed 2,000 teachers in Memphis only, which was about 18% response rate. We worked with the Memphis Education Association and sent the survey to every teacher in the district. The reason we chose Memphis, because Tennessee was one of the first, first to the top, one of the first race to the top states, and we felt like we wanted to ask a few years in the $1 million question: was the evaluation system having an impact ultimately on student learning through giving teachers information about their practice that could help them improve? And, we had no idea really what we would hear in the aggregate from the teachers there. And what we heard is overwhelmingly they felt like it was helping improve student outcomes in the district. I think that was about 60% of teachers who responded positively there. And I think it was 68% of the teachers felt like they were getting helpful feedback from their administrators based on the evaluation findings. And close to 70% were getting access to additional resources from the district to help them improve their practice.
Promising.
So I would definitely hold up Memphis as one place where the early signs are very good.
Okay. Now, is
In
it
a
fair?
state that did very well on NAEP.
Oh, Alice had to get that in there. No Miss Napery here from
I
this
won't
panel.
say causation, but I think that'd be another good research report for somebody to look at down the road.
Okay, good. But let's be clear about this, that these evaluation systems, especially the observational frameworks that we're talking about, they have a point of view about what good instruction is, right? I mean, and that's the whole, if you're watching a teacher do her thing, at this point you're no longer just saying, hey, we don't care if the kids are doing yoga all day, as long as the test scores are good, that's fine. You actually have some sense of what good practice looks like. And at the same time, there's this other thing happening you may have heard of called the Common Core. A few of us are rather involved in that. And that too, yes, has some point of view on what kids should be learning and instructional. Are these pieces, are they coming together? Are they clashing? What do we know about that at the local level? Sandy?
So, I mean, I think there's a couple of things going on. One is, I think a lot of places started out trying to think they could capture everything under the sun in their instructional rubric. That's how we're going to get the best picture of what instruction looks like and get the best feedback to teachers. And then they quickly found out how unmanageable that is. When you try to go into a classroom with literally a 17-page rubric in your hand, it's just not manageable. So most places have found they need to focus on a smaller subset of things which can't capture everything under the sun. I think places are having to now take a look, and the timing is not ideal to say, we've just invested in this rubric, we've been training with it. To what extent is it aligned with now where we want to go on Common Core? And in some places it's going to be a hard, cold water moment of saying, crap, it really isn't aligned, and what are we going to do about it? What gets me a little frustrated is, Common Core didn't just start this year. Common Core has been around in most states for, in most states, as long as their teacher evaluation requirements have been out. It's that many places haven't paid attention until the tests got closer. So some of that misalignment maybe could have been avoided. But the thing we can't do now is pretend it doesn't exist if it does.
And do these kinds of rubrics, again, for those of us that aren't living and breathing this, do they come out on all these debates we have in ed schools and things about progressivism versus, like if a teacher gets up and gives a lecture, right? And let's say it's a very effective lecture, but it's a lecture, and it's the the sage on the stage. If under, say, the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, under its old rubrics, you'd get marked down for that, right? Because you're supposed to be a facilitator of learning. Do these things get into those kinds of issues?
Yes, some definitely do, and some are a little more agnostic and focus more on the student behaviors, what the kids are doing in response. Some are more specific, but most are pretty general to that kind of stuff. Although, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I want you to finish your thought.
The other thing I would say, one thing that I am increasingly concerned about is whether a rubric that is appropriate for a typical classroom is also appropriate for a special education classroom, and I'm not sure we've looked, I was going to say closely enough at that, but I'm not sure we've looked at it at all, frankly.
Rob?
Well, when you talk about the observational rubrics, most of them have been developed with some research-based. It's not just guys sitting around going, well, I think this sounds good. There is research-based behind them. But again, I'm going to go back to trying to think you're going to get to the perfect measure without, give me an average rubric with good implementation and good over a great rubric with poor implementation and not providing the feedback. We'll take that. The focus on the words in a rubric, the focus on technical things gets in the way of us actually improving instruction in our classrooms. We should, there's this focus so much on the technical aspects of things, and we forget that learning happens between a teacher and a child, and we got to figure out a way to increase that and make that more powerful. And we can do that with these guidelines that rubrics provide, because they do in some places give teachers roadmaps to help them move to the next level of their performance. But it should be looked that way as it's a growth opportunity as opposed to a measurement process.
Right. right? Okay, yep, Chet?
One of the things that I think is interesting is we've looked at those rubrics that have been around a long time, and to a large extent they haven't changed a lot. So to the question, do they align with Common Core? Do they align with standards-based instruction models that are out today? There are really some very clear misalignments as we look at these things that don't get us to where we really would like to be, as Sandy and Rob mentioned. The other piece where we're seeing the systems that are having what I would say the most success or most supported success of the rollouts and implementation are those that have simplified these highly technical documents where the rubric has got, is 4 or 5 sentences, and it just doesn't make sense. And so that's where we're seeing it be impactful. When a teacher actually understands what is it that my principal or my coach is going to come in for and look for, that really helps. The other piece is just being totally transparent. Let's help you understand what it is we're looking for, how we can support you, and why be afraid of that? That makes sense, but oftentimes it's clouded in this cloak of, their misperception. We're going to get rid of it. So
Okay, and really boil it down to the essentials. So for example, were we to develop an educator evaluation system for the Secretary of Education, we might say, does not offend key constituents on a regular basis. For example, that would be one thing that we'd look at. And all right, again, just trying to get that joke in there. Okay, last time nobody tweeted it. I'm hoping maybe this time I'll be more lucky. Okay, Alice, let's turn now to talk about this policy question. All right, whether states should be giving lots of flexibility to school districts or not. Right? And it seems like there's sort of a couple different options. I mean, one is provide all kinds of flexibility, but also provide some models, assuming that many school districts are small, don't have the capacity to do their own thing. Other way would be just total flexibility. Other way would be this sort of, here's the state model, and we're going to make it hard for you to use anything else. Where do you come down on that in terms of the state role?
I come down, I don't think we'd have the Memphis model if Tennessee had not given districts an opportunity to develop something on their own within certain parameters. An interesting story behind the development of the TIM in Memphis, the district went to several hundred teachers in partnership with Teach Plus to get their input. And they put, I think, forth 4 different models that were being used around the country and other evaluation systems, and asked the teachers for input. The teachers who were part of this process picked the DC impact system after looking carefully at 4 different models. I think they were not necessarily aware of the politics around impact. They were just looking at it in terms of the substance. They liked it the best. And that's what this is based on. Mm-hmm. Like I said, it's clearly making a difference. The teachers say it's making a big difference for their kids already and for themselves. So I think having, I don't think it needs to be a blank slate. Mm-hmm. I think having parameters is fine, but yeah, I think there's definitely room for local innovation.
And Sandy, do you guys take a position on this? What do you like to see?
Yeah, so I think flexibility is a good thing, but the availability of a state model as an option seems like a really smart idea, because there are districts, look, there are states where there are districts that are way ahead of the state, right? And you don't want to bring them back to square one because the state finally decided to move.
Though that's happening, as it turns out.
Though that has happened. Yes. But to suggest that every district in the state has the capacity, the resources, and frankly the will to build this on its own, the availability of something, if you don't want to take that on yourself, seems really helpful and necessary. Michigan is actually kind of a crazy example, because they first passed a law in the run-up to Race to the Top that didn't get them very far, and then they passed a second law later on that pushed farther. Districts have been trying to implement the requirements of the first law before the second law kicks in. It's a big mess. But in any case, the EdTrust Midwest put out a report on what it was that districts were doing in good faith. There's no reason to assume it was anything but good faith under the requirements of the state law, and it is a pretty big mess.
So, okay, Michigan, big mess. What states are actually doing this well, would you say?
Well, I mean, it's really early on, and there are really only a few states that are even in their second year of implementation. I mean, I think the trend is, that it gets better, and that no place is going to be where they need to be in the first year, and then the second year is where we really need to watch and see see what happens. Tennessee, right, the horror stories in the first year, teachers are going to the emergency room because they're so upset, although I've heard that is an urban myth and not really true. I don't know. But the second year, there was calm in Tennessee. Teachers were familiar with the system. They felt more comfortable with it. It wasn't unknown, and things, it was just generally better received. And the state made adjustments. They had started with observation requirements that I think were based on the idea of we're going to get teachers this massive amount of feedback, but it just logistically couldn't be done. And they made adjustments. They made adjustments wherever they needed to. DCPS has made refinements each year to the impact system. And now what they're doing this year around the PD and the related support, I think is really impressive. The teacher in action system, if people haven't seen, is really worth taking a look at. So you can't have it all in place right at the go. It's really, what happens in that second year.
Now, many of the stories about the train wrecks have been about teachers that don't teach reading and math. Right, and the states are still trying, perhaps under pressure from the feds, to figure out ways to hold those teachers accountable for student outcomes or to measure their impact on student outcomes. And so you've got these ridiculous situations where the gym teacher is being judged by reading scores, etc. Is that still happening out there? Can we just get rid of that stupid idea and just focus on observations of those gym teachers instead? I mean, I want my kid's gym teacher to do a good job teaching gym. I don't really expect her to have any impact on his reading ability.
Yeah, I do think that most of those stories early on had a lot to do with federal pressure and much less to do with anybody thinking those were really good policy decisions. Especially the race to the top states, they promised they were going to have a system in place that was going to measure everybody with a growth measure, and the feds held them to that promise, no matter how impractical it became. I mean, nobody...
Wait, so you're saying a federal mandate led to bad practice on the ground in the real world? I'm shocked! Okay, sorry. The moderator will go back to not making comments.
Physics teacher getting evaluated based on 9th grade ELA scores, right? He teaches science and he doesn't lay eyes on those kids for another 3 years, right? That's preposterous. We tracked in this paper we just put out what states... We put the specific language in a big table, exactly what they say around the growth measure. And there are still states that require a school-wide measure, generally as an add-on, as a 10% if there's a algorithm attached to it, because I think those places think of it as skin in the game for everybody. But we didn't find any place that at the policy level says we're going to use a school-wide measure as any individuals.
Is this still a problem, Rob?
This is a real problem because I think this conversation needs to step back a little bit, because why we're talking about this adjustments happening here, adjustments happening there, all these matter to teachers. These evaluations count. We're acting as if they don't count. And what teachers have been saying since the beginning of this, we understand these programs need to adjust and get better. Why don't we slow down a little bit on the high stakes? But that was required again, and get these things right. I agree, there's adjustments happening in every teacher evaluation system around the country to make them hopefully better. That's the whole idea. But why that's going on, we're running down the tracks. We're keep going. And when you have, I know people there are thousands of teachers who have been dismissed using those systems. And that's the issue here. This is why teachers will say, it's not about trust, because you say, well, we know it's not very good, but I still have to do something with it. Mm-hmm. And this is the problem. And this is, again, the similar, and when you talk about similar things and you talked about the Common Core, you can see a parallel here, that we have to go so fast to get this done instead of getting it right. And we're focusing on the wrong things instead of focusing on the expectations and the promise to Common Core. We're talking about the measurement of it. And if we can't decouple the measurement of Common Core with the expectations we're trying to have and get people knowledge about it, we're going to struggle mightily, and this reform will struggle like all of them. It's because we have this get it done instead of get it right philosophy in this country. And we need to get it right. And when I hear these changes happening, that's great. But these are the kind of things that they still count for people. And we need to do it much better. We need to understand that these changes are hard, especially when you talk like everybody's talked about with the instructional expectations of Common Core. These are major changes, which should happen, but they shouldn't happen in this, well, it's all about a high stakes accountability. It should happen because it's what's right for kids, and we need to help teachers understand and give them the tools and support to do this work. That should be the focus of this stuff.
All right, so Rob, let's talk about the tools and support piece, and I'll get Chet in here too. And Alice, what do you have in mind? What should be happening that's not happening, and whose job is it to make it happen?
Well, I think there is a job all the way. When you talk about accountability, this is where accountability needs to run uphill a little bit instead of just downhill into the classroom. Are teachers giving the time? The number one resource teachers ask for is time to work together. One of the things that'll come out, with the international relations, teachers in the United States have the least amount of time to prepare around the world. And we're asking them to change their curriculum, change their expectations, and do it in a time where we don't give them time. That's the number one resource we need. Every teacher will say time. Resources, high quality training materials around what are the expectations of evaluation, what are the expectations, what does it look like, what do you have to do, and having conversations with other teachers around student achievement. Those are the things that will make a difference for performance. Those will make a difference for kids in the classroom. Research has said that over and over again, but we still tend to ignore that research and still push on with other policies.
Chet, what about from your perspective? What kinds of more supports can be provided that aren't being provided?
Well, I agree with Rob. I think additionally there are, one of the things we've realized is that we can help guide practice, and whether it's an administrator or a teacher, with the tools that will support them and help them make sure that they're doing things, whether it's an observation, that they're capturing the information appropriately and getting feedback to teachers very quickly. Tools, we found that technology enables that to happen much better instead of a paper and pencil tool that gets utilized and a teacher doesn't get feedback for we find sometimes 6 or even 7 weeks, even in today with all the pressure, which is absolutely useless. So having tools and using technologies can really add a lot of value, we're finding, and consistency to hopefully minimize pardon the expression, the brain damage that we heap upon teachers all the time.
Okay. And Allison, in a place like Memphis or other spots, what is it that's making both the teachers feel bought in, but is also actually helping them improve their practice?
So with our teacher leadership programs, we work primarily with high-performing teachers who are in high-need schools. We have 3 teacher leadership programs, about 20,000 teachers combined in 6 urban areas, primarily. So what we hear from high-performing teachers is that what they want most is other high-performing teachers to work with as colleagues. They also want a great principal. They also want ongoing professional development that's connected to their needs to grow. In DC, I think one of the frustrations we've heard from highly effective teachers is that there's not enough of a growth mindset from the district. They want to continue getting professional development. They don't want to just go from an effective teacher to a highly effective teacher. The highly effective teachers want to keep growing. They see a long road ahead.
Like
many
super
more
duper
students
effective,
in
or
their
what's
future. I don't
above
know what
that?
we
Got
call
it.
it,
Okay.
but they don't
Lifelong
They don't think that they're there yet. Once they have that label, they see it as continuous improvement, and they want to continue to grow and do the best they can for the kids, not just in their classroom this year, but down the road. And so, I agree we have to be careful when there's consequences, but inaction is a consequence for kids who have an ineffective teacher today, tomorrow, the next day, and the next day. And we cannot let perfect be the enemy of the good. When the NAEP results came out, I will talk about that again, not just in the Tennessee context, but the DC context. I went and was trying to look up, okay, since Impact was implemented, how many teachers in DC have actually moved on? Because what I've heard anecdotally from some of our high-performing teachers in DC is that they are thrilled that some of the teachers who they were working with in high poverty schools who had no business year after year after year being there, were finally moving on. And that was good for the kids and good for the teachers who would have the kids that next year. So I think we have to be real. We have to be careful, and we have to look at a lot of evidence before someone's dismissed. But we can't say that just waiting till everything's perfect to take any consequences is the right thing for a lot of kids who are not getting what they need right now.
I mean, what do you say to that, Rob?
Well, first thing I say, there's a lot of innuendo in a lot of the statistics, and I don't want to step back. And plus, I feel I'm not going to talk a lot about DC's impact because I'm involved in the system in DC with the work there. So it's inappropriate for me to speak on that here. But one I think I will say is that somehow believing that the problem in our schools is we have way too many ineffective teachers and that we're going to fire our way to better schools is ridiculous. There's no research, no study, it's never been done. And to sit there and still have that out there,
well, there's
is
studies.
nonsense.
I mean, there's a lot of simulations. Hanishek and others have done.
Well,
They say, look, you remove the 5% worst teachers, achievement will go up quite significantly.
Simulations. Everything's about a simulation. Everything's about a model, a statistical model. We're talking about real world, real teachers working with kids. And there's a lot of places that could do this and have done it, and they've not been able to show the real world improvement that people talk about. Anybody can do the statistical modeling to show things, and I can make, statistics say anything I wanted statistics to say. But what I'm trying to say is we need to also work carefully to move forward on student achievement and help teachers get better. The best thing we can do to improve student achievement in low-performing schools, high-performing schools, and every school in between is create systems that help teachers improve. Every teacher, not ones that just focus on the low performers or the ones that are struggling a little bit, but ones that help the good get great and all that kind of stuff. If we do that, then performance in this country will skyrocket. But we still think it's about this little group of people over here. It's nonsense, and we have to move away from that.
By the way, Rob, while I've got your, some people on Twitter want to know, if you want to have some kind of moratorium on the high stakes, how long? I mean, are we talking about a year, 2 years? When do you think it's fair to sort of come back to the having stakes in the system again?
Well, I'm not going to speak. President Weingarten has given a big speech on, and people can read about the answer. Saying when you put a number down to it, it's going to be 1 year, 2 year. The moratorium isn't about stopping things moving forward and we're not going to do anything. It's about moving forward and getting better at this work so that when we do bring in the stakes, they mean something. They're trusted. One of the things that Chet showed, and one of the things that 60-some% of the teachers are wondering whether the evaluation system even measures what they're doing. We need to get that a little bit higher. We need to have a higher trust in the system. Then the system can be used for all these other things. The problem is we're forcing it upon people. We think we need to work on the teachers instead of with them in a lot of places. And this is the problem we're having. So when you talk about an amount of time, I don't know the amount of time, but what I'm saying is slow down and get it right on all this stuff, because that's the only way we're really going to improve schools. We are, people use about, language like train wrecks and this is not going well and it's imploding. It's because we have arbitrary schedules we've set. Arbitrary. Somebody sat around and said, hey, 2 years would be a good time. What do you think? Everybody look around. Okay, 2 years, yeah, sounds good. Why don't we look at what the work entails before we set those schedule and figure out how much work has to be done? Because like all we're seeing here and all this research is there's a lot of work still needs to be done. Let's help people do that. Let's put the effort into that, getting that work done, and that's what I'm talking about.
All right. Okay, so first of all, we're going to get the audience in here, both here and online. We want to get your questions. If you are out there in cyberspace wearing your pajamas right now, you can tweet your question to us at evalterrain. Okay. You want to get in here quickly, Chet?
I was just going to say, we actually have had 8 different studies where when teachers have been given the supports they need, and large. You know, for us, 750 schools is a small group. We have 2,000 plus schools that have participated. When teachers are given the supports, we see at a minimum reading scores double, math scores triple compared against district averages. So there are things. We don't do simulations. We get out there and we see what's real. We believe we have a responsibility to make sure that it works. So there are great things that are going on where teachers do feel supported, and retention rates are increasing of teachers, dropout rates are decreasing in these schools, and a lot of other things. But
Unicorns, rainbows? No.
Not yet.
Okay.
We're working on
All
it.
right, good.
Leprechauns.
Leprechauns, sorry.
Alice's point, I mean, yes, some of the schedules and timelines have been very, very quick, but there's a terrible urgency out there to make sure that all kids have effective teachers. And we have to balance those needs. Yes, we want to do right by teachers and have systems that teachers can trust and feel good about. But waiting until we have those systems while there are kids that year after year are in the classroom of an ineffective teacher is not a balance we can have. So
Sandy, you're saying you would like to fire some teachers.
I couldn't agree more that we have to be about helping all teachers grow and develop and improve. And there are definitely states that have put it out there that, the supports are for the ineffective teachers. And if you have an effective rating, well, then you don't need the feedback and you don't need the supports and you don't need to grow and develop. And frankly, we're not even going to evaluate you again next year because you're fine. Instead of saying, well, how could we help you be even better and continue to grow? And how do we turn you from a good teacher into a superstar teacher? And then those are really terrible messages, and it sends a message that this is all punitive. At the same time, I think that there are real consequences for kids when we do nothing about ineffective teachers, and we have to be able to do something about that.
Like fire them.
And yes, and states that have spelled it out, I don't think there's a single state that allows the firing of a non-probationary teacher with a single ineffective rating. I think it in every case has to be multiple ratings.
All right, let's go to the audience. We've got the man behind the column here, Tom Talk. We're going to get the microphone over to you so that everyone, hold it real close. Tell us your name, where you're from, ask a question. That's not a speech, etc. Go ahead.
Tom Talk with. I'm going to try not. My name is Tom Talk. I'm with the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. So, just a quick observation and a question. It does seem like, at least in the first part of the conversation, there was a little bit of a tension between those on the panel who were suggesting that the goal should be improving teaching and those who suggest yes, low performers. It seems like the false choice. Sandy, I think, suggesting Sandy for everyone. It seems like another one. But my question is about the implementation of federally mandated evaluation programs. It's clear through Sandy's research, in particular, that we're not making much progress, or we haven't made much progress yet in implementing these programs. But we're also facing a funding cliff, too. If, in fact, the waiver requirements go away, some of the funding dries up, as well as it's scheduled to from the federal government. The panelists believe that we, in fact, are going to lose momentum in the teacher evaluation fund before we even get these new systems in place.
Okay. Funding's drying up, tough environment out there. Is this reform going to get strangled in the crib? Anybody?
So I think it's a real worry that some states were given many, many millions of dollars to do this, and they'll tell you that they spent it's taken every penny that they've had. There are other states now that, especially the states that don't have any underlying state policy and only have what they promised in their waiver, so it hasn't even necessarily gone through their legislature to think about appropriations. And so then it's up to the districts to figure out how to fund this. I mean, I think that's a real worry. I don't think it means we're going to see moving backwards, but I think it really is a very important question of what it means for quality implementation.
Yeah, my response would be, of course, the resources matter, but I also want to say that maybe what can happen is some of the existing money needs to be repurposed to be supporting teachers instead of measuring them. And we have there could be an effort there to say we could do some things, clearly when a school district has less money and the grants will run out, there's going to be that concern. But we've lost many years this urgency about helping kids. What has happened in the last 5 years about helping teachers improve? Where's the urgency on that? All this question about urgency, it's a targeted urgency. It's a targeted. It's not urgency to really help everybody improve. It's an urgency to have these kind of high stakes in place. That's the urgency. That's where it's targeted. Let's have that same urgency. Let's have that same screaming from the mountains that until we got to help teachers. So there should be, it's not just money from outside, but it's also repurposing money we're spending right now on some of the things that we probably should repurpose monies in school districts.
All right, but Rob, that sounds like something that's got to happen at the local level, though, right? I mean, it's always hard for state or federal policymakers to make that sort of stuff happen at the local level, right? I mean, so it takes local leadership to say, hey, we're going to do this well.
But I agree with that. It does take local leadership to do this well. I completely agree with that point. But it's also, if we had leadership from the top at the state and the federal saying, this is what this reform is really about, spend your money on this. Mm-hmm. That would be helpful because you give people some room to move. Mm-hmm. Right now, they don't have room to do that because they're in a compliance mode around X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Make the compliance A, B, and C, and leadership would do that.
Okay.
So I think the key, you said it, Mike, it is leadership. We want state rights, districts want district rights, schools want schools rights, and what happens is we have gotten so discombobulated with how we approach things that we end up not getting a consistent data set that we can actually make decisions on to help teachers with. So as the funding runs out, we are very focused on working with districts and have been, but even pre all the fun and exciting extra money that was there, to think about how does this impact your system long term? How do you lead out? And states, you need to lead out. Give districts some flexibility, but there may be some things that are critical for every teacher that needs to be observed. Are students engaged in the classroom? Some of the high level things. Are you giving students feedback? I mean, every teacher should be doing these things, and the funding should be directed towards guiding and helping and maximizing the money that's invested in evaluation instead of splitting it up, and then at the end of the road, we say, how do we do this?
Alice?
So to me, the money running out, I'm less focused on that right now than the concern that folks check the box and say this is done before the true soup to nuts connection from evaluations to meaningful professional development that teachers across the country say they want and need, that will help them improve their practice wherever they fall on whichever continuum that is being used by their system. Mm-hmm. And thinking back to Race to the Top, and when the original language was written on evaluations, and it was a long conversation around what I consider to be, the game changer. All of this is prelude, is towards making sure that our highest poverty schools, our highest needs students get their fair share of good teachers. And, I defy anyone in this room to show me a place where that is really happening at scale right now. That's what it's going to take to close the achievement gap. And that's how these early conversations about evaluation back on Capitol Hill and in the early days of the administration, that was the discussion. Let's figure out, where we sort of are in terms of our teaching force. And then let's figure out how we get the kids who aren't getting what they need, which is a great teacher. That's what we want, all of us want for our kids. That's what we need in schools, a lot of schools where that's not happening right now. Okay. So that's my fear, is that this stops before we really...
Right. You want to get into the redistributing teachers.
That's not the word I would use.
Okay. All right. Question over here.
Good morning, everyone. I am Mary Collins, a retired math teacher of 33 years.
Oh, actually, let's use I think we need to use, that one wasn't working for the audience. at home.
30, yeah, okay. 33 years as a mathematics teacher in secondary schools.
Right.
And my question is, in all of the research that you have been doing and the data that's coming out as a result, did you include the curriculum for all of these places, which is very important?
Yeah.
Did you include leadership and what is going on not only at the local school level, but the leadership at the district level? And then thirdly, the resources and the training, that's part of the training that goes along. Because otherwise, if you didn't include all of those, because those are components that make up the total.
Yeah.
And everybody is talking about, I got to give this speech, sorry about that. It's teacher, 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 and I'm not hearing you talk about anybody else. And there's a three-legged stool here.
Right.
And also parental involvement. Did you include those things in your data?
Good. So let's get into some of those issues. First of all, let's talk about principals who are charged with doing many of these evaluations, although in some systems now you also have these other evaluators. A lot of people have been complaining that we haven't done enough to train principals, or that these principals just are not well suited for this role. Are we making any progress on that front?
It's a really big issue. We cannot take for granted that our principals are going to be good observers, that they necessarily know what good instruction is when we send them into a classroom to observe, no matter how good the rubric is. There are no doubt there are places where the teacher trust issue in the evaluation system is because they see the person, they know the person who's doing the observation, and they don't have confidence in that person as an instructional leader. I think that we have more and more evidence that multiple observers is a good thing. That's costly. That's not something that places are going to be able to do easily. But we do see places thinking about, well, okay, we can at least do that for a percentage of people to help validate. I think that has a lot to do with what I showed about states saying that evaluators have to be certified. They have to go through a training process and be assessed in some way that they're ready at the other end. But that's still a relatively small number. This is an issue that's going to stay. As Alice said, teachers want to work with other good teachers, and they want to work under a strong leader. We know that, and we have to have those building blocks in place.
And this question about curriculum, I mean, this really does worry me too, especially in the states that try to mandate a certain approach. Like, we still have local control over curriculum, particularly in, say, charter schools that might be by design trying to do a very different kind of approach. I mean, isn't this a huge conflict?
So we actually, and ma'am, I didn't catch your name, I'm sorry.
Mary Collins.
Mary Collins. I would respond directly and will do so. We actually are in the midst of studying these issues. So for us, it's always teachers, leaders, students. And what does that really mean? And then with the Education Achievement Authority of Michigan, we're looking specifically at those issues. We're taking schools that have been, looking at schools this last year that had new teachers, new leaders, and they have a great leadership team there that is really trying to push the envelope to meet the needs of students in these high poverty areas where they've been horribly neglected. And the results this last year have been astounding. I've talked to many of the students, gone into many of the classrooms personally, and it's exciting what's happened in a very short amount of time, and how the overwhelming majority of teachers are very positive about what's happened. The leaders, now are there holes and opportunities? By all means, yes. Nothing's perfect. But they are looking and watching and observing and studying all of these things and having great impact, where the students are 61%, this is the interim data, 61% of these kids that showed no progress in the prior year jumped to full grade level, 42% jumped to full grade level. So we'll see what happened at the end of the year, but great things going on, and they're making changes with the curriculum that doesn't work, and with the teachers where it's not impactful. So
Okay, we have a question from Ashley Inman online. She wants to know if there are some systems overseas that we should be looking at that are doing a good job evaluating teachers. Do they even do this in other countries in this same sort of way?
Well, I
Rob,
can
you've
answer
been
that.
traveling.
Yeah.
This was a softball for you, Rob. Oh my goodness. Yeah, we didn't.
This is a great question, because we act like we can't learn from other places. This was a publication put out by OECD in April of 2013. It is where they went to 30 countries and looked at their teacher evaluation system, their school evaluation systems, and talked about what they do. These are the highest performing systems in the world.
What's the name of that?
This is called Synergies for Better Learning. It's on. You can find it on the Google. It's not hard to get. And the issues here are there are learnings here that we tend to ignore. We're in this country and we're having this discussion. We're having this panel about teacher evaluation has been going on, and here is one of the leading experts of international education talking about how you do it. By the way, chapter 5 in here is on teacher appraisal, and it talks about the 10 things that you need to do, and you should compare those 10 to what we're seeing in the United States. You'll see a difference of opinion, and this is the problem we struggle with, is that we tend to use research when it fits our needs, because when OECD comes out with their PISA report in December 3rd and rates our country, and wherever we end up, people will use that. It'll be the headlines everywhere. When this research came out to talk about helping schools improve and teachers improve, didn't get any mention. There are other countries that do this, but other countries struggle with these issues too. They struggle with the yin and yang of improving and evaluating. But what they say is err on the side of improvement, overdo that, because that's what will affect most kids in most classes. You'll get to this, you'll get to the other side if you focus here. It will come, it'll happen. But if you do this, and this has been the topic of the international summits on teacher profession, they just had it in Amsterdam, talked about the same exact thing. There are learnings out there, and we need to pay attention to them.
Alice?
I agree. I think looking outside at other models is really important. I also have, I think we need to look.
Plug alert.
Plug one other publication. This is a Teacher Plus book, Learning from the Experts, Teacher Leaders on Solving America's Education Challenges. And this just came out a couple weeks ago, but is hearing directly from some of the best teachers in the country what they think needs to be done around teacher evaluations, around Common Core, around a whole series of issues, including teacher equity, equal distribution of great teachers. So I think listening to teachers, and to your point, the only thing I would add to your list is leadership opportunities for outstanding teachers. What we hear over and over again, who to better provide professional development around Common Core than teachers who are already having success with Common Core, to teachers who are earlier in that process. I think there's a huge untapped resource in teachers who want to expand their reach, who want to do more for kids by expanding their reach to more teachers.
Let's get one more question in here if we can. Yep. Go ahead back there.
That was actually my question. My name's Linda Guidi. I'm a teacher from New Hampshire, and my question may be a little bit redundant at this point, but I'm hoping Rob and maybe some other panelists can speak to the teacher leadership issue. Clearly, we don't have enough administrators or enough capacity to do this well with just talking about administrators. And also, I think bringing teachers in would move us away from this tendency to rank and sort.
Yeah.
So who out there is working with teacher leaders as a way to build capacity to improve instruction, and what potential does that have?
Yeah. So this provides a real opportunity, right? A new professional opportunity for teachers. Yeah.
I want to answer that. I do believe the number one untapped resource any school district has is the people who work there, teachers, principals, because they're not the capacity. We haven't built their capacity to do all this stuff. There are changes happening around if you look at the stuff that's happening in Baltimore with the contract, the new contract in New Haven that has all that built in. It's exactly what it is. It's about building capacity. Cleveland's contract as well has that in there about building the capacity of people. But I wanted to say one thing about building principals. This is the hardest job in schools today, a building principal, because you're asked to do a lot of different things and a lot of changes that are happening, and they're happening at the school level. So there's camaraderie between the teachers in schools and building level administrators in most places about trying to learn why we're going down the road here. And if we could build off of that need and that common idea of where they want to go, we could do this. And this is where peer assistance review like they do in Montgomery County, but we could expand that. I understand it's expensive, but the idea is the expense worth the benefit should be the question, as opposed to just looking at the bottom line dollars. That's what we don't do. We sit there and we go, well, that'll cost X number of millions as opposed to this other program we'll buy over here. There needs to be some more deeper thought than just doing the bottom line, how much it costs, is how much would it help. There needs to be a little bit of more of that work in it as well.
Sandy, if we went into a typical ed school right now and looked at what they are doing to prepare their teachers for this new world of teacher evaluations and observational frameworks and the Common Core and all these changes, they're on it, right?
Oh, goodness. So one of the things that has disappointed me most is it seems so obvious in the state where there is a statewide framework, whatever you, for better or worse, whether you think there should be a statewide framework, you would think it would be obvious to the ed schools to latch onto that framework and to begin to make it the basis for teacher preparation. Why isn't that now serving as the rubric for student teaching? That doesn't mean we expect a novice to do what we expect an effective teacher to do, but the markers are the same, right? And we're better preparing teachers by helping them know what's expected of them. We haven't seen that happen statewide anywhere. We've seen some isolated examples where you can see an ed school, Tennessee, probably just because they're farthest along, you can see it showing up in a couple of ed schools. But by and large, there's a, we're going to do what we're going to do mentality. We're still deciding how we feel about the Common Core. We're still deciding how we feel about these teacher evaluation systems, and less a feeling of responsibility that we prepare teachers to be licensed in this state who are held to these requirements, and we're going to get on board with them. It is a really slow process with ed schools.
Okay. I think we had a last question over here. Did you still have one? Yeah? Okay.
Thanks. I'm Phil Piety, and I wrote a book that came out earlier this year about many of these issues, titled Assessing the Educational Data Movement. And the question I have for the whole panel is, do you think we're getting to the point where we're going to move beyond the notion of good teachers, bad teachers, to teachers who are stronger in these situations versus those situations? Because if we look at the reality of teaching, there's so many challenges that a teacher faces. Some teachers may rise to dealing with students of poverty better, some may rise to gifted and talented better, and some may have challenges with certain kinds of students. And I'm wondering, as we begin to collect more data from the observation rubrics, will we be able to get to a finer grain size and change, maybe nuance our conversation about what it means to be effective?
Good. Chet, I'll let you answer that one.
So one of the things that we've seen with evaluations, when there are multiple raters, and maybe this is an unexpected outcome for at least early on, is that it shifted the dialogue from, okay, good or bad, to, oh my goodness, we have 4 raters that had 4 different perceptions of how that specific teacher performed. Now that's a bit of it. That doesn't sound like much, but that really is a game changer. No longer now is it good teacher, bad teacher. It's good rater, bad rater, or is there something else? So we're seeing that the dialogue is shifting now, and I really do see that the evaluations that are going on, when we start to look at these multiple data points, really become impactful, and it takes it off of yes or no to how can we better support everybody that's involved, including the leaders that may be the raters and others, so that it's shift. We're seeing some of that dialogue shift in some of the systems we're in.
All right, let's let that be the last word. I think we will all share the same perception that this has been a fantastic panel. So please thank our panelists for coming. Special thank you to NCTQ and the School Improvement Network for co-hosting, to Michelle Ginninger for planning this event. The video will be up online immediately, thanks to Joe back there, and these reports are on the respective websites as well. So please check it out. Thank you very much.
And mine.
Thank you so much.
Hey, you bet.